We approach now the sacred precincts of the third ray, the ray of adoration, the ray that is the very epitome of the utter givingness of the selfhood of God to each and every part of creation. Beloved students of the light, whether you have expanded your awareness or not, one of the greatest graces that comes with the knowledge of your mighty I Am presence is that you have something bequeathed to you by your presence, which with every passing moment, something of ultimate and priceless worth, something that is desired and loved by every other part of life. That precious something is nothing less than the true individual selfhood of your own beloved mighty I Am presence. Recall, if you will, please, the thought form of the last year's New Year's conclave entitled the Bethlehem Daystar. It depicted a prosaic winter scene, such as might appear in North America or other cold climes around the world. And in addition to ordinary people going about their affairs on a winter's night, above each one, directly above each one, sparkled the dazzling day star, the Bethlehem Daystar, if you will, representative of each one's own mighty I Am presence. The work of discovering for yourself the wealth of God consciousness that is within that day star is the work of many lifetimes, and as you will shortly see, a work that is ongoing even after your ascension, even after you may have achieved the balancing of all of your karma, even after the ascension of the twin ray of your great God flame, as well as your own ascension in the light. One can only truly appreciate the nature of that day star as you are caught up in the whirlwind God consciousness that it embodies. As you are caught up in that consciousness, the grace of that consciousness affords you an ability that you may not have at present. It is the grace of the one shared consciousness of each and every I Am presence, in the knowing of the oneness, one with all others, the oneness of the great I Am, which is the foundation or background, if you will, of all the others. In that heightened state of awareness, there is entrusted to you once again the single-eyed vision of the God presence, which beholds perfection and only God perfection in every part of creation as well as the uncreated realms. This grace affords you the insight into the true nature of every other heart flame in this world, every other life stream. Not only the incarnate threefold flame, but the ability to trace the lineage of that flame back to the source of the electronic body, back to the ray that streams forth from the great God flame, likewise individualized, back to the great I am, back to the one and the good, back to that which is best denominated the presence of God. In this, then, you are able to broadcast, beaming from your own daystar of the electronic body, beaming from the divine spark of your own threefold flame, you are able naturally, spontaneously, to give of yourself to every other mighty I am presence. So this path outlined yesterday, which exposed the terrible consequences of human sympathy, this path introduces something vastly more transcendent, more magnificent than sympathy for human misqualification. Here is how, beloved Saint Germain has spelled out this process so magnificently and succinctly. He is addressing a condition that may well occur out here in this world of form when, in the course of your employment, your recreation, your family relationships, time and again there is forced upon your attention the human fallibilities of other life streams. And not only their fallibilities and shortcomings, but even the heartbreaking circumstances that they may find themselves in. And juxtaposed with that confrontation, there is the injunction that one should send forth unconditional love to every part of life. Now, sending forth unconditional love, in this case, is not intended to mean that you are to validate or love the imperfection, that you are to embrace it, to accept it as being real, to give it any power. Here is the correct approach that you are capable of achieving. When a student on the path feels that he or she cannot give forth divine love to another, it is because that student does not understand the genuine activity, the true activity of love. Where there are two individuals, one seemingly in disgrace and the other standing guard, so to speak, the one standing guard is not expected to focus their attention on or to attempt to love the discordant outer misqualification of the human self, but rather they are to redirect both their attention and their heart's adoration to the glorious God being of the mighty I Am presence that is not permitted to express through the outer consciousness. To love this glorious being because of its innate beauty and perfection, and to pour forth great love because it is not permitted to express due to the discords of the outer self of that being. The Christ attitude is to send the paramount compassion and love directly to that imprisoned presence, which is God, which is the light, the source within that outer selfhood. This love anyone can pour forth with great devotion. So that is a very clear, higher way of interacting. One of the ways in which Jesus referred to the most precious aspect of identity, the divine spark within the embodied life stream, was to liken it to an innocent newborn lamb, the lambs of God, that were quite vulnerable to the depredations of the coarseness of outer life. But he was able, and everyone felt that unconditional love coming to them from him because he was loving that true outpost of their mighty I Am presence, covered over though it might be by the sheaths of the four lower bodies that did not give free expression to that heart flame. So Saint Germain goes on to point out that when you are confronted, when you do see such a dichotomy, then it is your office to give the conscious demand with great determination and power that God break down and dissolve all of those veils and barriers, and to liberate that radiant God presence to once again take its rightful dominion and assert and create its perfection in that the outer world of that other individual. And he goes on to make it very clear that you who are standing guard in such instances have the divine right and the divine office to make this demand and command to set free that presence within the other individual. You have that right because all of God is one. And it is absolutely not just a philosophical tenet, but it is an absolute truth that I am here and I am there. So your presence and the presence of that other life stream are one. And you, being an embodiment, are in the perfect position to make the call for that other life stream. Making that call is not a case of aggressive mental suggestion that is directed to the outer personality. You are calling to your I am presence, you are calling to the ascended masters, and you are calling to the I am presence of that other life stream, which is the authority for that life stream, just as your presence is the ultimate authority for you. And in that overriding oneness of all individualizations of God, individual I am presences, you have that freedom to make that call with all the intensity that you may wish. We hasten to point out that while you are making that call, it is directed to the I am presence of that life stream and left to the devices of that I am presence to send forth the light from that presence, supplemented by your own, of course. But it is placed within the hands of the I am presence and the Christ presence of that other life stream to determine the who, what, where, when, and how, and why the call is answered. Your role is to have that compassion for that other life stream and to make the call. And having made the call, to rest in the confidence and the faith that God is in action there. God has been set into action there. And that in doing so, all that is lawful is being done, at least by your life stream. And it is from that point on up to the Ascended Master sponsors, the mighty I am presence of that life stream, to adjudicate how that call is answered. Of course, so long as you do not feed doubt or fear into the reinforcing the outer condition, you may rhythmically reapply those calls. And all of our world action decrees and world service decrees are directed to this very process. As you enter into this exercise more and more, you will find that you will have that faith that no matter what the outer appearance might be, that you are only giving power and authority and are making the assertion that God is in action everywhere. Kuan Yin, long ago, she who is the acme of mercy and compassion, has told us that when you truly master this process, so that you do feel the light going forth from your God presence to every other mighty I Am presence, that you would be able to stand amidst the wreck of worlds and stand unmoved by that, as do the ascended masters. You may have heard the instruction that at the level of your Christ presence, your higher mind or higher mental body of the Christ presence does wield the two-edged sword of Christ discrimination, comparing and contrasting what is taking place in the four lower bodies of the individual and of the world around the individual with the yardstick and the standard, the gold standards of perfection in the heart of the great central sun, and cleaves asunder the illusions of unreality from the God realities that are eternal and immutable in the heart of the great central sun. So yes, the Christ presence does have the ability to discern, which means that to some degree, like the rays of the sunlight passing over a mud puddle, the Christ consciousness at the level of the Christ presence does temporarily or momentarily look upon those outer conditions. However, the Christ presence, it is very clearly stated, does not permit the slightest reverberation of any of those outer appearances to pass the threshold of the open doorway of consciousness into the realm of that Christ presence. This means that there is no etching of records within the world of the Christ presence that record anything less than God perfection. In that sense, your Christ presence is impassive, unmoved by those things that it may temporarily have to discern. And that is the standard for the would-be initiate on the path. That is the standard, and really the only means of victory through the ascension. The only way of rising out of this world in the victory of the ascension after hundreds and thousands of lifetimes stretching back into the mists of antiquity, the only way is to no longer allow the dust of this world to attach itself to your garments of consciousness. So there must be flowing from you this one-directional flow. It is appropriately described. Interestingly enough, the term is called unconditional love. Now, unconditional love does not mean love me, love my dog. with its fleas. That is not the meaning of unconditional love. Unconditional love means that the love that really originates in the utter givingness of the individuality of your own true selfhood, that pours forth impersonally, universally, because it is the intrinsic nature of your own identity, that love issues forth from you and goes forth even as God sends his rain to fall upon the just and the unjust, or the sun to shine on the just and the unjust. That love goes forth and is not itself marred, disfigured, reactive to whatever it might encounter. Primarily, or chief amongst the qualities or the behaviors of that unconditional love is that, in fact, it is God, the presence of God, moving, giving itself, and must abide within its own intrinsic nature of godness or godliness, and hold to that pattern, so that there is this current that goes forth and gives of itself to every part of life without ever lowering the standards of perfection, but rather always loving the God, the spark of divinity, whatever is good in every part of life. You have had the instruction before, but it bears reminding or remembering it once again, that you could have a special pair of polarized lenses, sunglasses, whose faculty is that it filters out everything except the Buddhic web of the perfect patterns of the mind of God. And with that filtering, you would discover, lo and behold, that in the earth element, in the emotional realm, in the mind, there is pristine and pure nature, and there are those extensions of the God presence in every one of those realms. One of the consequences of the pouring forth of that is that you are really pouring forth the unique individuality that begins in the heart of the great God flame, and there is a term that was utilized very scientifically by those devoted to the love of wisdom. The term is hyparxis, and it is a word that aptly describes the identity and the action of the proverbial threefold flame, that you are beginning to know so well. Imagine a limitless sea of limitless light, such as the shadowless light that we just poured forth our love and address and adoration to. Imagine this operating as the goodness of the presence of God, the limitless goodness of the good that is utterly limitless and defies any quantification or specific qualification. It is the absolute infinite nature of the presence of God. And then consider that which by the way, that goodness of the good is really the amity or amness of the great I am. That is everywhere limitless. It is the background even to the great central sun. It predates or precedes the great central sun. Now consider that the great Spirit of God, the great I am, moves upon the waters of this limitless sea. And the action of this moving upon the waters is the consciousness of God focuses that limitlessness, focuses it to a mathematical singularity. This is long before time and space, but it's hard to even describe this action without allusions to a convergence of this limitlessness from all places. It comes together in that way. Even in the physical universe, there are counterparts that have some approximation of that. My goodness, there are focuses, gravitational focuses. They have the unfortunate name of being called black holes. But in reality, millions of suns, the size of our sun, are all compacted, focused to a hyparxis that has no three dimensions. There may be an event horizon, but all of that so-called matter and energy and everything is crushed, if you will, in that sense, to a pinpoint, a mathematical, dimensionless singularity. That focus of the Spirit of God moving upon the waters isn't just a past event. It is God expressing as I, the I of the am, the I of the I am. So that limitlessness is forever converging to that point of individuality and then issuing forth, not once or twice, but over and over again in different dimensions and planes of reality. It's described by Saint Germain as the divine spark that descends down the ray into the great central sun. And that divine spark acts there to pour forth the goodness of the good, which it is. And an amazing thing happens. First of all, it never runs out of the limitlessness of the amness of itself. It is a givingness of itself that is exhaustless. Because after all, it comes from a higher realm, which is, it defies limitation. There is no height, no breadth, no depth, just the limitless goodness of the good. So it comes into that world as that divine spark. And then that, having come to that point of concentration of I-ness, of the I am, in the lesser world, it then rays forth. And for each of you, your own mighty I am presence in the electronic body has its own lux invictus moment. That moment in eternity of the raying forth of that divine spark that goes on and on and on and on at the level of the God presence. It is changeless perfection, changeless totality and allness that is even greater than what it finds there as the unified groups of being and life and mind in the great central sun. And watch what happens as it rays forth that which it is of that goodness. The essences, the pranic breaths, the substances, everything that is there within that great central sun gets a whiff of that pouring forth of that which that divine spark is, that hyparxis of the threefold flame. And senses the oneness of that goodness. All of these other things were at one time part of that oneness. Now they are diversified. Now they are partial. Now they are specific somethings. But there is still the yearning, the desire to be that ultimate oneness, to be that ultimate, that God, the presence is. So when the radiance of that individuality lights up the great central sun, or lights up the nirvanic world, or lights up any of the worlds, including lighting up this world, whenever that radiance goes forth of the heart flame of the Godhead, every part of life detecting that radiance tries to get as close as it can to the source, because the source is so beautiful, so luminous, so adorable. It acts as a veritable magnet, the magnet of the heart. And without doing anything, what do flowers do to attract bees? All they do is unfold themselves and waft the perfume of their consciousness into space. That's all they do. And that's all it takes to have the kingdom of the bees home in on the source of that fragrance, so that they can drink the nectar of that condensation of God love, which has been distilled there in the throat of the rose or the lily or any of the other flowers. And this is the power of love that is passed along to your heart flame in your four lower bodies by your mighty I am presence. It is the consciousness of your God presence. It is the body of your God presence, the life essence of your God presence, its beauty, its perfection, its exquisite goodness and magnificence. And partial expressions of life have an innate desire for that which is greater than themselves. And so when they come across the wafting trail of that radiance going forth, they naturally home in and come in. So without ever using a club, you don't have to beat life over the head, without ever having to use aggressive mental suggestion, without ever having to use trickery or compulsion, but just by giving of the love of your heart, the presence performs its perfect work. And every other part of life wishes to be as close as possible to you. At various times, various ones of the ascended masters have opened the bosom of their own heart flame and allowed that unmitigated, unconditional, untempered light of that bare heart flame, if you will, to be radiating forth. And any part of life, yourself included, when you are polarized and held within the circle, the charmed circle of that outpouring of love, for that amount of time, time stands still. There is no time. For that experience, there is no separation that would be called a measurable distance. And you know the mystery of how it can be that form and substance can last from one eternity to the next, content to bask in that magnet of love and to remain polarized at that point, because they have all they could possibly ever desire. And hence the presence, the individualizations of God furnishing that essence of themselves, that super fullness. Because remember, what is the fountainhead of this? Nothing other than the great I am, the limitlessness of the goodness of the good, focused by the oneness of the one, and then poured forth for all eternity through that outpouring, which your heart flame is for every part of life. So as Leto says, this love must be first poured forth before it can release blessings back into your life. As Nada pointed out, Nada of the Sixth Ray, once she had discovered her own mighty I Am presence and felt the touch of that love, looking within herself, she saw that her own heart was indeed a veritable omnipotent magnet, and that everything that she could possibly need for use or even desire with a pure desire, that all was within the magnetic attraction, the outreach of that outpouring of that conditionless love, which is truly the nature of the God presence, poured forth to every part of life. There is most certainly the qualities of the second secret ray, We have put as a general heading for that the God virtue, the Christ virtue of authority, which is the ability of the I Am presence through you to issue its conscious, cosmic Christ command. And yes, that crisp, clear, unambiguous command does go forth as part of the directing intelligence of the one mind, of the one presence going forth. And yes, in one certain way, there is the compliance with that command. One side of the coin is command, the other side of the coin is obedience. The individualizations of God command, the universalizations of God respond in obedience, if you will, to that command. And both are a part of hierarchy, of that principle of hierarchy. And in turn, every part of the chain of hierarchy is both giving commands in the office of the God presence, but also, because it is part of a greater one, it is also the law of its being is compliance with the commands of that God presence. So yes, all of that is absolutely the case. But when love commands, the command of love does not bear any resemblance to the stereotypes that the world would give it based upon past precedent of human behavior. It is not a case of where you have a potentate commanding peons who have to bow and scrape and are cowering in subservience to some heavy-handed command. That is not what is meant by the command of love. It is rather a sense of the office of each part of one's greater selfhood, because you are not only the part of you that is individual in the I-ness of your I Am presence. You are just as much the amness of the I Am presence. And the presence is there as the one and the good that unifies and unites all into one body of God. And so you are really speaking to other parts of your own identity. They're not part of the individuality per se, but they're part of the hem of the garment of your identity. One of the most telling statements, repeated any number of times by the Ascended Masters when speaking to the students about the great sea of universal light, is the statement that the light knows its own. The light knows its own. At the highest level, the light, you and this light, are absolutely kith and kin. You are a band of brothers. You are of the same intrinsic fabric of identity. And there can be no greater marriage than the marriage between the individualizations of God and the universals of that same I Am presence. And that means that the great sea should not be either attributed to it some blankness that has no qualities whatsoever. It has all qualities at such a high level, such as to not have any one quality in expression, which is a good thing when you want to create. Because if it's already one something, it's much more difficult to make it into something else entirely. But when it is all things subsumed into the goodness of the good as the limitlessness of all that the presence of God is, it has the power, it has the capability, it has the capacity to answer in kind. And when your heart sends forth its love, the great light of presence, the presence not only in the highest levels of the great sea of universal light, but at all other levels of what you might call the footstool kingdoms of nature, the angelic kingdoms, the elemental kingdoms, all other parts of life answer the call in kind, because they recognize their own in the heart call that you send forth. So that is why, of course, love, this third ray of the 7 rays, is many times spoken of as being all-inclusive of all God qualities subsumed into one greater whole. And that is why our forthcoming Acropolis is entitled Love's Duet with the great sea of universal light, because it really is the song of creation, the song of life, where whether you are wearing the masculine expression of the Godhead or whether you are wearing the feminine expression of the Godhead, in all cases, you are the individualizations of the Godhead. And it is your role to issue that love call. And it is the role of this other part of yourself, that is the great sea, to hear and answer that call. And in that process, there is the close harmony of the twain that intertwine like Damien and Pythias, that like any two lovers would do. There is this intertwining of the ribbons of song and the ribbons of the pouring forth of the love of the heart in a glorious maypole-like dance of eternal springtime, wherein the great sea answers your call. That's why it is the I am love call, not so much the Indian love call. It is the I am love call, which works when it is the your mighty I am presence that is giving this limitless supra-fullness of the goodness of the good, as well as the oneness of the one, as the I am of its own nature, and all of nature, in fact, every other part of God as well, at its higher level, will answer. If you send forth a lightning bolt of love from your mighty I am presence to the sleeping heart flame of another life stream, regardless of what that other life stream might be engaged in, and regardless of the fact that they outwardly will be probably oblivious to the fact, if you send forth that love to their heart, the heart flame within that life stream will answer in kind and return that lightning bolt of love to your presence. And you can set up that action in answer to your call such that your mighty I Am presence will be its own love star with those probing fingers of the Lux Invictus Daystar, sending forth that call without any quantification, limitation whatsoever to every other of the billions of heart flames in embodiment or preparing to re-embody of all unascended life streams, as well as all the members of the Brotherhood of Light. All can hear that call, and all will answer that call automatically. Of course, how much better it is when your heart flame is the lively stone. When your heart flame, when your mighty I Am presence can perform that action, not only in the electronic body, the causal body, or the Christ presence, but when your I Am presence has unfolded and expanded that heart flame within your four lower bodies, and your presence is able to send that forth to every other part of life. It is really quite enchanting, mystical, beautiful beyond words to send forth love from your heart flame as that I Am love call, and observe as the great sea receives that into its bosom and actively cooperates and actively answers that call. It would be a great mistake to think of this great sea as if it were like a piece of sheet metal that you're going to put into a mill somewhere and stamp out a fender for another car, where it's all a mechanistic, brute force action that is absolutely just impersonal. That would be a great mistake, because this is the limitless amity of the goodness of the great I Am. And in reality, it is the Godhead. It is the Holy Spirit that is the great I Am that answers the call of the individualizations and answers in kind, giving forth of itself that which is within it, just as it must have intelligence for your intelligence to respond, so too, whatever modulation of the infinite variety of qualities that are within the Godhead, that are all considered to be under the heading of love, within your heart flame, so too, all of those are there within the goodness of that limitless light. And God Almighty answers. And out of the marriage of those comes the coming to be of creation. So I've asked that, just as a foreshadowing of our week of Acropolis, we take advantage of the coming of beloved Paul the Venetian and the action of the third ray to let your hearts be lifted into this sense that we have Jeanette and Nelson standing by. But you should understand that in this case, Nelson represents all of us as the dynamic activity of the individualizations of the God flame. And Jeanette represents the echoing answer from the great universal sea of the limitless light, answering that call, and the twain intertwining, and out of their marriage comes forth, bursting forth, as Homer described it so magnificently in one example that we'll share with you this week, comes forth the chaste, pristine expressions of Mother Nature.